Welcome back to the Living Generationally podcast. I'm your host, Brianna Laurie, and this podcast exists to challenge and equip you to live a life of legacy that leads to the future. When you're considering how your daily actions and decision making not only impacts the current generation, but also the next generation as well too. And in today's episode, guys, we're going to be diving deep into what it looks like to live with a life of legacy and how we steward the day-to-day moments. Because one of the philosophies of living generationally, excuse me my words, is that legacy, we often see legacy as this big, all-encompassing all-encompassing concept. Reality, it is, but it's more simpler than that. I believe that legacy is made up of the day-to-day moments where we get to decide how we're going to act and live. And those moments determine the legacy in which we leave behind. And I don't think we often ponder that. I think we often think of legacy as this far outreached goal or something that culminates at the end of our life, when in reality, legacy is truly made up of how we're going to steward the day in which the Lord has made, which is every day, and how we're going to steward those moments and those days. Um, yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking about, and I'm excited, and I'll see you on the other side. So we are going to start this episode by first reading in Luke 16, and this will give us context of where I want this episode to go and what the Lord is leading in to talk about. So if you have your Bibles, you can open up to Luke 16, verse 10. And I'm reading in the New King James Version if anyone was curious about that. So starting in verse 1 in Luke 16, it says, "He also said to his disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward, and an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig, I am ashamed to beg. I have resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his master's debtors to him, and said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. So he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. And in verse 7, then he said to another, and how much do you owe? So he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt truly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourself, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, and when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much, and he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? And then in verse 13 it says, no servant can serve two masters, for either will hate the one and love the other, else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And Luke 16, verses 1 to 13 is a part of a bigger context in which the unjust steward was called to give an account of his stewardship before his master. And because the steward was not properly stewarding what his master had given him. And we see that the steward, in his fear and not knowing what to do, he then came up with a plan of going to his those who owed his masters and kind of settling deals with them. Um, and then the verse I want to focus on is verse 10. It says, "He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much, and he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much." And I was looking at a commentary just to properly handle these verses and understand the context. But I think often the way in which this verse 10 is used is to compare that in order we must be faithful in what is least, and wait, okay, um so he who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. Yeah. So the way that you steward what you have right now in the least is how you're going to steward when you get more. And if you're stewarding in a poor way, you're going to steward the more you get in a very poor way. And if you have little, but you're stewarding it in a way that is honoring the Lord, when you get more, you're going to steward it in a way that honors the Lord. And that is the way that the verse is usually interpreted, which is a not a bad interpretation. But in the context, verse 10, when it says least, it's comparing mammon, money, to um more, or like the righteous things, which is stewarding true riches, which is the spiritual riches in which the Lord has given us. Like, um yeah, so that's when I was reading the commentary that it was talking about that, and how it's often interpreted versus what it seems like the context in which Luke 16 is talking about. But I want to draw from that. I want to draw from verse 10. And I think often when we think of legacy, or living generationally, or having a multi generational view on life, we can have this big vision, which is amazing, but we don't know how to incorporate that big vision within the day to day moments. How do we steward what the Lord has given us so that we can leave a legacy of faithfulness for the next generation to carry on, or even those around us in our communities to carry on as well too. And I think it's important that we start with the day to day, because th- those day to day make up years, days make up months, months make up years, and years make up more years. And how we steward the the day in which the Lord has given us determines how in which the legacy we're going to leave behind. Many people leave behind a legacy of brokenness and dysfunction, because the way they lived their day to day life was brokenness and dysfunction, and they continue on that for a longer period of time, which end up turning into a legacy of brokenness. But we have others who see the day to day, and they see it as a blessing, and they see it as an opportunity to steward what the Lord has given them, and they take it very seriously. Not that they don't fall short or make mistakes, they do, but they walk in humility and allowing the Lord to correct them. And then those people end up leaving behind a legacy of faithfulness and good stewardship of the things in which the Lord has blessed them with. And I think it's important that we talk about that and navigate that. Because if you're like me and you want to live a life of legacy, of faithfulness and love and financial stewardship of the Lord has given you, so maybe, Lord willing, one day you can leave an inheritance to your children and their children's children. Um, it starts in the day-to-day moments of what the Lord has given us, in the least of things. And this is the least of things, money, like compared to the spiritual riches in which the Lord could entrust to us if we steward what he had given us properly. And many of us are living our day-to-day life where we're complaining, we're living in bitterness or envy or jealousy. We're seeing that someone else's life is what we desire, or we're seeing the task in which the Lord has given us as not enough. Imagine like a, like the being like the Lord and he giving you a task, and imagine how he feels about that, where we are complaining about the task that he's given us, so that in us he can create maybe the characteristics that we desire to carry on to our children, or um, to be salt and light in our communities and those around us. And the Lord is using those day to day moments to build that character, to stretch us, to humble us, and to make us look more like Jesus. And we have to be cautious in how we steward the things in which the Lord has given us, because what you may see as the least of things, and for sake of for the sake of like this video and just what I'm trying to get across, think about like washing dishes or sweeping the floor or cleaning the bathroom. If you're like me, you can be tempted to be like, I do not see how this fits in the purpose in which the Lord has for my life, or I don't see how, you name it, the task, how that fits within the mission or vision the Lord has given your family or yourself. And we have to pause and remind ourselves that the Lord is using all of these things for good. And we know that according to Romans 8:28, the Lord works all things for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So if we know that we serve a good God who's using everything for good, the little moments in which little mundane moments where we think that there's no purpose in them, that he's using all of it for good. And we must begin to change and renew our minds and say, Lord, oh, I've not been stewarding what you've given to me properly, Lord God. um I've been selfish. Maybe you've been like the unjust steward, where the Lord has given you a gift or has given you daily tasks or has given you something to do, but the only account that you have is com- like complaining or walking in bitterness. And though you may do those tasks, the Lord truly cares about the heart of his people. And I think it's important that um, we learn to be faithful in what the Lord has given us, because it models how we're going to steward those greater things the Lord gives us in the future, if that be his will. And it doesn't have to be of like financial resources. It can be any task that he gives us. And we must walk in faithfulness if we want to model faithfulness in the bigger things as well too. Yeah, so that is my encouragement to you, is to examine how are you stewarding the things in which the Lord has given you. How are you being faithful in the little things? Are you complaining? Are you becoming envious or jealous? I think it's important that we examine our hearts and come before the Lord and confess that. And we know that we serve a good God who does not condemn us, but who invites us in to walk closely with him. And he's growing us through every single moment. And to live lives of legacy where we're stewarding the daily moments creates the bigger vision and mission that we desire to leave behind here or to carry on into the next generation. And yeah, that is my encouragement for both you and I, that we not complain, but that we come before the Lord and we ask for his help, and we do it heartily unto him. And that's something else I want to encourage you in, is that whatever you're given, do it unto the Lord. And yes, like, you may be serving someone else, but remind yourself that whatever you're doing, you're ultimately doing it unto the Lord. And we, even as believers, have to give an account for the lives in which we lived. And I think many of us are living very complacent, and where there's so much work to be done and so much to be a part of, and we're not taking part in that because we don't care enough, or we are not taking the Lord seriously when he says that we will have to give an account to what he has given us and how we steward it, because ultimately all that we have is his. um And yeah, I just want to encourage you in that whatever the Lord has given you, do it unto Him, do it faithfully, um, for His glory. Being reminded that living with legacy is choosing how you're gonna act in the day to day. And I hope that you're blessed by this episode, and that you would reflect on what legacy that you want to leave behind, and what legacy is the Lord um, leading you and your family in. And with that, that is the end of today's episode. If you liked this episode, maybe please give it a like. And if you're on YouTube, you can subscribe. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I would love to hear what you think about this episode. And I have a question for you. Like, what are you doing in your day to day? What are some changes that you need to make in a day to day to leave behind that legacy in which you desire to leave behind? And yes, until next time, live with legacy leading to the future. Goodbye, friend.